Hello, everyone. My name is Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be here with so many of you today. And what a wonderful array of guests we have here today to talk about our indigenous peoples, the indigenous peoples of this land, the untold story. Brought to you by the Rainbow Push Coalition. Of course, Reverend Jackson has always said red, yellow, black, brown, and white were all precious in God's sight. And today we're here to talk about just that. Oftentimes, when we look at Independence Day, when we look at the 4th of July, when we look at Memorial Day, Labor Day, et cetera, et al., we neglect the story of the indigenous peoples of this land. And today we're here, Mark Thompson, to correct that history, to do our part, to look at the people who are at the foundation of our story here, not his story or her story, but our story in the United States of America. And so as we think of what to the slave is the 4th of July from 1852, that magnificent speech by Frederick Douglass, the great emancipator, as we think about the founding documents, our Declaration of Independence, in which the indigenous peoples, our brothers and sisters, were labeled savages. As we think of the removal acts, as we think of so much of their story that we don't know, that is left untold on this Independence Day. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, I'd like to, of course, start with you, Reverend Jackson. I'm so glad that you're bringing us together on this Independence Day as we looked at President Trump at Mount Rushmore yesterday. Many people we saw, if you looked at certain news channels, Mark Thompson, we saw a very rosy picture. But many people don't know that he faced a good many protesters getting up to Mount Rushmore yesterday because indigenous people said that this is a desecration. And yet, thousands of people persisted and insisted that they be at that event. Why did you want to tell the indigenous people story today, Reverend Jackson?
Good morning, Santita, and to the panel. You should know the truth, and truth shall set you free. I often say that America's original sin is slavery. It's not true. Original sin is genocide against the Native American population. America was born in the sin of slavery, shaped in the iniquity of white male supremacy, which was the root of it all. I want to thank Chief Hoskins, who is now a member of the Rainbow Pushers Board, as we seek to align ourselves with the indigenous population. 573 tribes of Native Americans across America. And because of the massive wipeout, there's so few of them, they hardly rate politically, but they rate morally, moral high ground. Concerned that we know Tallahassee is an Indian tribal name, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Seattle, Indian tribal names. We know too little about this part of our history. So we have some need, the Rainbow Push Coalition, to in fact involve the Americans as real members of this family. The issues are issues. Their trees have been violated, our trees have been violated. We should fight with them. Treaties on it. But last night, Mount Rushmore, Santee, was stolen property, confiscated property. So we established that now that some years before to get the Redskins named from the Washington football team. About to happen now as Black Lives Matter escalates. The fact of the matter, the Cowboys said that the Indians scalped the whites. The fact of the matter is, when they had 1832, they was a good Indian is a dead Indian. With the removal of American Indians, if you brought an Indian to the trading block, it paid per dead Indian, per male, a little more female children. It became inefficient. Well, let's sell scalps. White people scalped Indians and sold the scalps. Men, women, and children. We must know the ugly history of this. But today is the day to bring it about, Brother Todd, because America was born in the sin of slavery, shaped in the iniquity of racial white male supremacy. And as we now begin to pull down statues of Confederates, treasonous soldiers, we must now unearth truth of our foundation, the nation conceived in liberty and slavery coexisting. It's a contradiction that we cannot stand. We will not stand any longer. We will bring the name down on Redskins from the Washington football team. We will also get a commitment to honor treaties. When I look at the Navajos dying, the greatest number dying, and the COVID-19 sickens me. We cannot be dismissive of Native Americans dying without water, dying without hospital resources. Today we're getting married again, really getting married to our Native American families. Balkans, this is our time, and we're going to do it now. Reverend Todd Yeary, who is our Washington Bureau Chief and Vice President, has a lot to say about this. Some of my roots go to Cherokee, South Carolina. My father's parents were in part Cherokee, part Ethiopian. So we are all entangled with the Native American population. We're them and they're us. Santita, thank you very much.
Well, good morning, Santita, Reverend Jackson, and to all of our friends who are on the call. This is such an important conversation against the backdrop, as you have lifted up, about the debacle at Mount Rushmore, with all of the conflicted symbolism, but the very clear rhetoric that was coming out of the mouth of the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. You can hear the incitement to hatred in the words that were chosen on the eve of the day when we tell the fairy tale of independence. As we tell the untold story, it helps us to put in proper perspective what the nation often holds on to as the epitome of its story. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a truth to be self-evident, but not realized by all people. And so the contradiction is not only in the rhetoric, but that which has flowed from it. And so this conversation helps us to begin to correct the telling of the story, to begin to understand the unique nuances, to make sure that we walk in self-evident but clearly told truth. And so I'm glad to have our Native American brothers and sisters. I thank Licia Maddox for being my sister from another mister to help kind of do the coordination. She is a great colleague working on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians. And so we've got great work to do together. Santita, I'm putting my seatbelt on, ready to go for a good ride today. As my big brother, Mark Thompson would say, happy 4th of their lie day. All right, let's get it straight and let's get to the conversation. Thank you.
Reverend Jackson and everyone, it's just an honor to be on the program this morning. You know, I think that the experience that I've had in my life is in some ways the same experience people all over the country have, which I was raised not knowing about those fine details in some of the founding documents that would refer to Native Americans as savages. You know, it wouldn't be until I was a young adult that I would encounter that. And I think what that reflects is that we're a country that glosses over or completely ignores parts of history that's uncomfortable. And goodness knows there's so many chapters of American history that are uncomfortable. Many that are great, but many that are uncomfortable for Americans to talk about. But we have to talk about it. So I think that it's great that today we can talk about some of those difficult chapters. You know, yesterday the Washington Redskins, under pressure from corporate sponsors, started to do the right thing. I was talking to my daughter about that. She was aware that Nike, you know, was going to put some pressure on the Redskins. But I said, you know, Nike doesn't do that if people don't raise their voices. And even though it's taken generations of raising people's voices, we had some results yesterday. So I want my daughter to feel encouraged about the future. And I think yesterday was a way to do that. But I'll tell you what was discouraging for her and me and my wife was the coverage of the protesters yesterday as the president went to the Black Hills, sacred for the Lakota people. The coverage really across mainstream media just wasn't there. I mean, you really had to go, you know, on Facebook to see some live feeds to see what was going on. And I think that tells us that we still have a long way to go in the country in terms of telling this story. And that's why I love the name of today's program, The Untold Story, because it's untold in terms of the history, you know, me growing up, not knowing those aspects of my own people, perhaps being referred to as savages. And it's untold today in terms of a day in which the President of the United States goes to the Black Hills. And yet the story of the history of that and the current protests are marginalized. And I think we have to work to change that. And I think engaging with the Rainbow Coalition is one way we can do that.
The untold story. The Rainbow Push Coalition is bringing together the untold story. You can react to what happened at Mount Rushmore last night, but what don't we know? There's so much that we don't know.
Absolutely. Good morning again from the great state of Louisiana and from the sovereign nation of the Coushatta. We are located in southwest Louisiana, and we have 966 members in our tribe. And we're very, very proud, and we consider it a privilege and an honor to join you all this morning, including Reverend Jackson, who is an icon here in our country, who's been a leader for several decades in social justice and civil rights and so forth. It's an incredible privilege to be here this morning. As you know, the story of Indian law and policy here in the United States is tumultuous, and for a lack of a better word, unbelievable. And in the context and the background of what's happening in this country, we're facing unprecedented challenges and crisis. It's very appropriate that we have these types of discussions. And again, some of our panelists mentioned that these are sometimes uncomfortable topics to discuss. But just because it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, it doesn't mean that we should hide them or sweep them under the rug or try to wish them away. This is a part of American history, whether it's good or bad. As you know, since the founding of America, the indigenous people inhabited North America for thousands of years and centuries. And since the founding of America, of the United States, Native Americans did not become citizens of this country until 1924, which relatively speaking is only a short time ago when you think about it. In addition to that, voting rights for Native Americans in every state only occurred in 1962.
Mr. Sickey, on Independence Day, you have been citizens 96 years, not even 100 years.
Absolutely, and it's remarkable. Another fact is that Native Americans have been, to this day, have on a per capita basis, enroll and enlist in the United States Armed Forces voluntarily. We have the highest rate of any segment of society of Native Americans volunteering for this nation's armed forces, which means, in other words, that despite what has been done to our tribal nations and tribal people in this country, our people continue to serve proudly for the defense and the spread of freedom, not only here in America, but around the globe as well. And I'm very, very proud of that fact. We're not only, as the tribal chairman of the Coushatta tribe of Louisiana, today it's a huge honor and a privilege to serve in this role. But at the same time, I'm reminded of the fact that we're not only addressing the needs of 966 members of my own tribal people, but the policies and the ordinances and the laws that we adopt as a sovereign nation here in Allen Parish impact non-Indian lives as well. So the modern day tribal government has an immense responsibility to practice good governance, good, sound, stable governance, because many lives are dependent upon the success of the Coushattas. In the wake of the Coushatta success story, or my people, and the beneficiaries are non-Indian people as well. You cannot draft a better story than that. And again, our wonderful stories of our stories of challenges and oppression must be balanced out with discussions of progress and achievements that we have made as a people and as a country. And with that mindset, with that type of view, I think that together we will find our way to a better life, the life that America promises for all her citizens. Thank you all so much, and I hope to see you all again. And I extend to everyone here, and also to all of those that joined us live, a personal invitation to visit us here at Coshada. God bless you all, and Alilamo.
Bless you. Reverend Jackson, would you like to close this out?
Yes, and there's a book, Keeping Hope Alive, collection of some of my speeches and sermons. Here's about Dr. Grace and Kim. You'll all need to get a copy of this book. I'll send those on the Zoom copy of it today. My great-great-grandma was not a slave. She was my great-great-grandmother, not slave. So slaves and savages, that language must leave. No savages, no slaves, really. People who were enslaved. The second piece of that, it seems to me, is that linkage. In 65, they formed a treaty with African Americans, a treaty. But it was never for African Americans on the blacks couldn't vote for 85 years. White women couldn't serve juries in the South to 67. 18-year-olds could not vote. Couldn't vote on college campuses, could not, the Indians recognition of vote 73. Latinos in 75. So in that same period of time, Brother, we all gained the right to vote. We're the new majority. So in the future, if you have to drive about 3 hours to vote, it's all of us. Because when Kennedy won by 113,000 votes, your million votes count. Bush took the election from Gore by 527 votes. A million vote count. Your linkage is important, the numbers are important, and your moral authority is most important. This will not be we're going to have this conversation a lot. We must really get some influence the people, Barbara and Congress and others who are not a part of this conversation. They must learn this conversation. Some mayors and some sheriffs and some police chiefs, Black Congress people. We must go out of our way to really have this a much broader, bigger conversation soon. I think truth depends upon it. And in a time of Black Lives Matter and people of color matter, none matters more than the original peoples of our country. Cynthia, thank you for being my daughter and being both the producer today. Dr. Todd and Shirley Davis, a big shout out to Shirley producer, Shirley.
Pulling all of this together. And Reverend Jackson, I want to ask everyone, as we ask them to get your book, and that's a collection of some of your speeches. I can't wait so that we can hear straight from the heart, so we can hear many of your speeches from the 70s and the 80s. There's several things that come to mind. I remember when you were running for president, you were launching your bid in 1983. I think you were doing Meet the Press. And Chief Hoskin and Mr. Sickey, Reverend Jackson, my father was asked a question that was very insulting at that moment. One of the Calv brothers, we would remember him, Attorney Jones and Reverend Dr. Yeary and Barbara Harwine and Reverend Thompson. Growing up, they were two prominent voices in journalism. I forget which brother it was. It was either Bernard or Mount Margaret, who asked Reverend Jackson, "Are you Black or American first?" And so I made note of your flags behind you, Mr. Sickey. You're not American. You are American and you are Native American. You're both. There's so many things coming from so many places, but you come from here. And we honor that. And we thank you for being with us today and giving us that lesson and showing us those flags. You take me back to my great-grandmother, now her stories about the Native American in our family. And it's a substantial history because my father's from this part of North Carolina. In South Carolina, you have the Low Country, which is where you have the plantations. Where he's from is where you had a real mixture of Africans, Native Americans, and Europeans, and they became a new people called the Melungeon people, which is really what he is. But you have to know those stories. You have to know that history. These are things that we have, Mr. Jones, Attorney Jones, we put them in the inner recesses of our minds as we've been fighting a black-white struggle, and we have not known that the struggle is so much bigger than that, right?
Ahosca, North Carolina today, Ahosca, North Carolina. Really?
Well, you know, and your father is one of the first African Americans buried in his family plot because everybody else there was Native American. So we have a shared history, and we have a shared, not just shared blood, but a shared experience. And we thank you for sharing with us today, Chief Hoskin and Mr. Sickey. Your history, our history, the flags, thank you so much for that. And, you know, and I leave you today asking you to support the Rainbow Coalition, because we need your help. 773-FREEDOM, 773-FREEDOM is our number, rainbowpush.org. You can find out what we're doing. Every week we encourage you to like and share this Facebook broadcast. We want people to hear the untold story. We want you to know that the Native American has only been a citizen for 96 years. Let that settle in on you. Let us think about Langston Hughes today. I think that you would appreciate this more, almost being so lyrical yourself. Reverend Thompson and Reverend Dr. Yeary, so brilliant you both are. Let us close with these 5 lines from the great bard, Black Bard of Harlem. Oh, America was never America to me. Oh, yes, I say it plain. America was never America to me. And yet, I swear on this oath that America will be. And I thank you all for being part of this conversation today, because indeed, America is coming into being. Truly, we are going to make America great. We're going to make it there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there together. That's the only way. Reverend Jackson?
This is in prayer. Reverend Yeary, please.
God, for this time together where you've convened family from near and far, we are humbled and grateful as we are reminded of the names and the presence of those who are now in the realm of the invisible. We are reminded that we are not alone. For the vision and the voice of Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr., to ask the family to gather on this day, we are grateful. And so help us to link arms virtually while we're physically distancing